And we are live!
Hooray!
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn with your host, me, Rabbi Nick, and our wonderful live virtual studio audience watching on Zoom. Watch wherever you are in the world, Facebook, YouTube, Zoom itself. Come along and join us as we go into the exciting world of Lunch and Learn. We will be getting today to the last Mishnah in chapter 5 of Pirkei Avot. Hey! It's a shame that we can't be in person and, crack open a bottle of bubbly to celebrate, but we'll enjoy it together nonetheless and relish in the pride that we feel for having reached such an amazing milestone. And mazel tov to you guys as we, in due course, finish chapter 5. So, just a short word on this week's Parsha, Parshat B'Shalach. The Jews are out of Egypt. Well, hey! And just to summarize in a nutshell the flow of the narrative of this week's parasha. So the Jews come out of Egypt and they are fleeing from the Egyptians, and all of a sudden we read about how Pharaoh has a change of heart. And so he chases after Bnei Yisrael. And Bnei Yisrael reach the banks of the Yam Suf. They reach the banks of what we call the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, however we want to translate it. And the Jews have nowhere to turn. If they go back, they're going to face the Egyptians. If they go forward, they're going to be in the water. What do? They panic. Oy vavoy li. And as we know, a miracle occurs and the sea splits. And whether it was 1 track or 12 tracks, however the actual experience would have looked, nonetheless, the sea splitting allows the Jews to cross over safely. The water comes crashing down on top of the Egyptians. All of the golden chariots and all of the gold that they had with them washes ashore, and the Jews, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, are able to take that wealth with them. And the response is the Song of the Sea, as Yashir Moshe. Then Moshe sang. And so we have a wonderful, intuitive, prophetic outbreak of song that occurs. And if you have a look in the Chumash or in the Torah scroll itself, then you'll see the unique way in which that song is presented in terms of the what's it called? The structure. It doesn't look like one stream of text. It looks like this, with a few words, then a gap, then a few words, and a gap. And these are described as bricks. It's built as a structure of bricks. 3 and then 2 and then 3 and then 2. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, but I just thought I would mention it nonetheless. And then, immediately after the Moshe and the Jewish people break out into song, we read about the women singing, and Shira was just sharing an idea with me. So spoiler alert for anyone who reads the weekly newsletter, but it is quite an incredible idea. We talk about how Miriam cracks out her tambourine and starts leading the women in song and dance. And the question is asked, well, where did she get this tambourine from? You know, if you were having to run away and escape somewhere and you've only got a couple of minutes to pack up your bags, why is the tambourine the first thing that she thinks of? Why is that a priority? And so, as you'll read, no doubt, in a much more enriched way on Friday in the newsletter, the idea is, in a nutshell, that Miriam, representing Jewish women, was always confident in the knowledge that the Jews would be saved and that there would be an occasion to celebrate. So it was intuitive and it was a priority to take along a tambourine, because she knew that salvation would come. She knew that there would be a time in the very near future when that would be needed, because she had such conviction of trust in the Almighty that the Jews would be saved. which I think is quite an incredible idea. I'm sure Shira will
flesh it out.
maybe she'll change her whole hold of our Torah now. I don't know, but still, it's a strong message for us of constantly reinforcing for ourselves the need to have that trust in the divine plan, and to know that everything will be all right on the night. Anyway, then almost immediately after that, after they've seen all these wondrous miracles, after they've been saved, after they've had their salvation and everything is amazing, you'd think like everyone is in a really good place right now. We read about how just a few days later they are without water, and the Jewish people complain. Not the women, of course, not the women. But the Jewish people complain. Where's the water? Oh, what are we going to do? We shouldn't have come out of Egypt. At least in Egypt we had this, we had that. So they've complained already at the banks of the Yam Suf. They complained 3 days later that they don't have any water. It's quite interesting that constantly we see, and then again they go another couple of days, and then they're complaining again that they don't have any food. So it's very interesting, and we're not going to answer this now, but it is very interesting that the first thing that the Jewish people do coming out of Egypt, you fast forward a couple of days, broch, ochen vei, as Paul says, right? What are we going to do? And they complain. And then a few days pass, and then they don't have water, and they complain again. And then a few days pass, and they don't have bread, and they complain again. It's amazing how the instinctive reaction from the Bnei Yisrael is to complain. So we have the parsha of the manna, the miraculous food. I'll get to you in a second, Paul. The miraculous food that Hashem delivers daily to the Jewish people, that will sustain them throughout their entire travail during in the desert. They get one portion every day, which will last them for the entire day. And they get 2 portions on a Friday, one to last them throughout Friday, one to last them throughout Shabbat, which is why we always have 2 chalot on Shabbat. It symbolizes, as well as other things, it symbolizes the 2 portions of manna that the Jewish people would receive. It's also why we have this custom of wrapping the chalot, and it's interesting actually because my mother-in-law set homework for her year 1 class and asked them why we have a challah board on Shabbos. And one of the mums got in touch with Shira and said, "Your mum's given us his homework, but why do we have a challah board on Shabbos?" And Shira was like, "What should I say to them?" There was only one answer that we could think of, and it ended up being the one that my mother-in-law was hoping to hear. So I'm glad I passed her year 1 test. So the reason why we have a challah board and then we have the challah cover over the top is because the manna was protected by a layer of dew on all sides. And so we have the cover underneath, so to speak, of the challah board. We have the challah cover over the top of it. So those chalot of ours are completely encapsulated as well, just like the portions of the manna were covered by the layer of dew. So there we go. 10 points for me and Shira. The only reason I wasn't sure about it is because what's the difference between a challah board and a table? But there we go. In that vein, let's pause for a moment and allow Paul to ask his question.
Okay, so there I am. I've just been a slave for how long? I've managed to leave. I've got all my family with me, 10 kids. It was great. And we're all going along. Oh, right, there's no water this morning. Oh, don't worry about it, it'll be all right tomorrow. There'll be water later. Well, get to the next day. Kids are driving me mad. There's still no water. Now, hang on a minute. No, I know I've got 10 kids. It's going to be all right. Just bear with me. It's going to be all right. Get to the third day, 10 kids driving me mad. And it's not the biggest surprise in the world to me that someone said, there's no water. What were they expected, or how long would they normally be expected to continue with no water before it was not totally unreasonable to ask very quietly and with due esteem, any chance for a cup of water?
Any chance for a cup of tea, love?
You know, put the kettle. No, it just doesn't seem totally unbelievable after 3 days of no water in the desert, but they ask for water. It might sound wrong. Maybe I'm completely missing the plot. And remember, the first 3 days got no food either. Let's not worry about the food and the 10 kids around me driving me straight. They've got no food and no water. So after 3 days, any chance for a cup of water? And I'm in trouble again because Hashem doesn't think I should. I tend to find that quite, I don't think it's unreasonable. That's all I'm saying.
So I don't disagree. This is why it's going to be important for us to learn about this more in depth. So stay tuned for the bigger picture in Parashat B'Shalach. But you know, I think there's a difference between asking and complaining. So I say this with little conviction, but that there will presumably be a problem with the complaining part, less so a problem with needing water and asking for water. And I would anticipate that there are lessons to be learnt about the way in which they choose to go about their response. That would explain why the story has to unfold in that way. Let's go Hammermans, Rita and Peter. You're going to fight it out between you. Who goes first?
No. One last thing. Whatever it is. We see the bracha. We uncover it, and then we say the bracha. So it doesn't really make sense. The covering up, because we uncover it to say the prayer.
That's not a universal custom. There are some people who keep the chalot covered when they make the bracha.
Do they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, neither did I until I went to a house where they did it. But yeah, there are different people who have different customs. Some will remove the cover, and that's how my family have always done it. It's how I do it. And there are some who will keep everything covered when they make the bracha, and then not only that, but they'll take off the cover for one challah, but they'll keep the cover around the other challah that they put aside.
Thank you.
So there are. Yeah, let's go Josephine and then Martin.
What about me?
Oh yeah, sorry. No, Joe, sorry, you're muted anyway, but let's go to Peter.
Is there any indication what the manna tastes like?
That's a great question. Because our sources teach us that it could taste of anything that they could possibly want it to. It was miraculous in that way. The Torah describes kind of what it looked like and what I guess its initial taste is, but I can't remember exactly where the source for it is. I believe it's somewhere in the Talmud, but it talks about how it would taste of whatever they wanted to.
And sauce as well.
Pardon me?
No, sorry, I'm just being flippant. You said we didn't know where the sauce is, so I said, they have the sauce with it as well.
Over to you, Josephine.
Well, I was going to ask something similar. I've always wondered what was the manna, what was it? And I thought perhaps there's some sort of plant that grew. And also for water in the desert. I know in Arizona, the North American Indians, there were cactus, and when there was no water, they cut the cactus and drank the juice inside. So there must have been some natural phenomena as well, that they could survive. I don't know sources for any of that.
Everything was miraculously given to them by the Almighty. The manna was sent every day from heaven, and there's lots of interesting things about it. There's sources that talk about, depending on, for want of a better word, depending on how holy they were or how well behaved they were, the manna was somehow miraculously designated for specific people. I don't really understand how all this worked, but there are sources that talk about how if you were on a, being well behaved, your piece of manna would be easy to find and right outside your house. And if you were not being well behaved, then it would be right on the other side of the camp, and you'd have to be walking around looking for your piece. How does that work? I wasn't there, but it's interesting. There's lots of sources that talk about manna, and what else were you saying? I can't remember. The water. So water was also provided for Bnei Israel eventually. That's after the first occasion when Moses had to hit the rock and the water comes out for the Jewish people. That which is also in this week's parasha, right? That's how they got their water. There was a stream of water in Miriam's merit, the Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam, which sustained the Jewish people throughout. And the whole point was to have that incubator of spiritual nourishment and divinely given nourishment to drive the message home that Hashem looks after us. So let's quickly finish off the narrative. So we have the manna, we have quail that is sent their way as well to keep them going, and then we have the water where they complain again that they don't have water. So Moses hits the rock, and then they get the water, and then finally at the end of the parasha we have an attack from Amalek, the thorn in our side, the nation that preys on our weakness and our vulnerable and our frailties. And so right at the end of Parashat B'Shalach, we have a battle, a war with Amalek, where we're taught that Moses kind of sits on the side, and anytime his hands are lifted heavenwards, and the Jewish people would look up and look up to heaven, so they were able to be victorious. And anytime his hands were getting weaker, then Amalek would start to overcome them. Eventually, thank God, the Jews overcome Amalek. But that's the end of the parasha. Okay, I saw hands from Rita and Joy and Martin. I think I was going to go Martin. I think I was going to go Martin, Joy, Rita. I think that's the order.
Just a quick aside, I go to a shir in the morning to Ben Sion, and we were discussing what bracha they made over the manna, because we said it could taste like anything. And I was trying to find the source, not a source, sorry, of what bracha they would make, and I can't recall what rabbi I saw, and I couldn't get it back again. He said the bracha was a bracha we can never make again. It was Hamotzi lechem min hashamayim, because God said, I'll give them bread from heaven. And from then on we changed it to Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. But this rabbi reckoned that was the bracha they made. Just a little.
Amazing.
That's the source of it, that it came from heaven, whatever it was.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, I didn't know that one. Over to you, Joy.
I'm aware that for the 40 years, they were in the desert, and they were sustained. They weren't in the same place all the time. They obviously were moving, trying to get to Israel Canaan. So I presume at some point they found a way of carrying water. It can't just be, it's here right now, because they weren't going to be there all the time. The well of Miriam wasn't going to be used all the time because they weren't going to be there. And I just wondered.
It moved around with them. Part of the miracle.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, there's so many midrashim, so many sources that talk about all of this stuff. It was literally a spiritual incubator, and they were not. The way that I've heard it described is, they weren't in the physical desert as we would picture it. I remember Rabbi Tatz describing how, when you walk through a desert and you've got hills and you've got mountains, you got this and you got that, right? The clouds that encircled the camp would smooth out the terrain as they went along. As far as they were concerned, like, their physical location was always just a beautiful, flat plain, for their tents. Eventually, the Mishkan. With this brook of this river of water that forked its way throughout the whole encampment. So, in terms of kind of moving through the desert, it would seem that they didn't move through the desert in the way that we might picture it. Kind of, Lawrence of Arabia, big panoramic views of streams of people walking through these grand canyons or anything like that. It would seem that they were in a bubble that protected them from everything. Clouds of glory in the day and pillars of fire at night that did the work for them, and that was part of the whole point, was to be in this spiritual incubator. So beyond that, I don't have much more to say, but there's a whole series of books called the Midrash Says. You can get them in the Jewish bookshop, and they flesh out a lot of these graphical descriptions of some of the things that we see in the Torah. It's worth having a little look into. It's quite fascinating. Let's go to Rita.
Right, okay. My recollection from all the years I've been doing lunch and learn, Moses was punished for going to the rock. He done it twice instead of once. Now, how do you explain that? He just wanted the people to drink water. So
that was the second time. This is the first time. This is the first incident with the rock. Right, the first time he was commanded by God to speak to it, to hit it. Sorry. First time he was commanded to hit it. Then, later, 40 years' time, Miriam dies, the well dries up, and they need water again. And this time, the second time, Hashem says to Moses to speak to the rock.
Right.
But he didn't speak to the rock, he hit the rock. And that was a mistake, and that's why he was punished. So that was the second time. This was the first time, and there's a 40-year gap, pretty much.
Thank you for clearing this
Josie Martin, you got a question?
I thought that with the covering of the horrors, because you say the bracha on the wine first, and you're not supposed to embarrass the horror.
That's also part of it as well, and that's why there is a custom of removing the cover when you make the bracha, because we do have a ranking and an order in which brachot should be made. And normally the first bracha that you make is hamotzi, on bread, right? And that actually covers a number of the other blessings. The exception is Shabbat or Yom Tov, when you have to make kiddush, and so you have to make borei pri hagafen on the wine, right? And so you're not making the normal bracha of hamotzi. So that's why we have this this concept of having the challah covered, so that there's an answer that says that it's so it doesn't get embarrassed. There's an answer that says that it's not visible on the table, because otherwise, if it's visible on the table, then you should be making the bracha on that first. I'll tell you something else. I don't know how many people would do this for their starter, but let's say you've got crackers for your starter, right, to go with your chopped liver or whatever. So we would make a mezonot on a cracker, right? Borei minei mezonot. That bracha should also come before drinking wine. So actually, if you're covering your chalot, you should also cover anything on the table that is mezonot, because that should also be prioritized before making kiddush or before drinking wine. So that's why in some households you'll find they don't put any food on the table at all until they've made kiddush, and that's why you can sometimes see that if people do have food on the table, they might have covered it over as well as the chalot, because that way you're avoiding any uncertainty and any questions of the ranking in order that you should.
So there's a very quick question on that. Does wine at the top? In the ranking? Wine is the top?
No, wine is not the top. Hamotzi is at the top, right? And Hamotzi will cover a lot of the other blessings underneath it, but Hamotzi is at the top. That was the one that you would make first. Okay, obviously if you don't have bread, right, mezonot is the next most important bracha, right, and that covers cakes and cookies and all that kind of thing. And then you've got, if you're drinking wine, you would make a bracha on wine. But then typically let's say you've got food on the table where you need to make mezonot, etz, adama, and shehakol, right? So let's say I've got cakes and cookies and biscuits and whatnot, then I make a mezonot first. Okay, if I've got fruit and vegetables on the table, so I should prioritize making a bracha on fruit first. Yeah. And then if I've got vegetables on the table, I make that blessing next. And then on my cream cheese, tuna and or salmon, or just lollipops, fish, water, all these different shehakol things. So I would make that bracha last. And the reason why we have a ranking is because if you go in the other direction, you could end up covering things that need a bracha. So, for example, if I've got an apple and I have got a carrot, so if I say Borei Pri Ha'adama first, which means blessing the one who creates the fruit of the ground, well, theoretically, apples also come out of the ground. So if I make a Borei Pri Ha'adama first, then I would have covered the apple. But the apple has its own. That's what I'm saying. So hamotzi trumps everything apart from wine, right? But if you don't have bread, then you've got a hierarchy. You've got a ranking. Because if you go in the wrong direction, you end up missing out on an opportunity to say a bespoke blessing for a particular item. So if I make Borei Pri Ha'adama, I've now lost the opportunity to say Borei Pri Ha'etz, because apples also come out of the ground. It's just that they are fruits of the tree, so it has its own blessing. But if I say a blessing of the one who creates fruits in the tree, that doesn't cover vegetables. So I've still got an opportunity to make another bracha on the vegetables. So that's why we have a ranking like that, because if you go in the other direction, and if you could say Shahakol Nihiyeh Bidvaro, everything comes from Hashem's word, then I don't need to make a blessing on anything, because I've just covered it with Shahakol. Everything was covered by that blessing. So we work our way downwards so that we can make as many blessings as possible, because if you go the other way, then you could end up missing out on.
Am I incorrect in that the blessing over wine on the Kiddush? I mean, if you do it with a shul, then there's no hamotz, because the Friday night blessing in shul is over the wine, and the Shabbos morning is over the wine. So the blessing, that part of Kiddush is Kiddush. The hamotzi is a separate item. If God forbid, a person was on their own and they went to shul and on a Friday night and they made the Kiddush, or whoever made Kiddush, would they have to make Kiddush again when they got home on a Friday?
Well, we're really, really deviating over there with that question. That is a long question.
But they would have to make hamotzi. What I'm trying to say,
yeah, no, I
they've already made Kiddush, so they wouldn't do it again, because that would be blasphemous. So surely they would just make hamotzi. So they're two separate. Can
we agree to come back to this in more depth after we've had a chance to do Pirkei Avot? But fundamentally, you're not supposed to eat anything on Shabbat before having made Kiddush, right? So Friday night dinner, we're supposed to make Kiddush first. Shabbat day, we're supposed to make Kiddush first before we go on to eating, right? We have a concept of making Kiddush in the place where you're going to eat, right? So if you're going to be at home to eat, then we would make Kiddush again, really, because we're going to be eating. And so it's even if you've heard it in shul already, it doesn't it doesn't mean you can't then make it at home. There are people I know who won't make it again, but there is a concept of making kiddush where you're going to eat. If somebody hears it in shul, I mean, one of the reasons we say it on a Friday night is because there are some people who don't have places to go or don't have access to kiddush or whatever, so at least they've heard kiddush in shul. But that's my summary answer, but let's talk about it more because I want to get us into Pirkei Avot.
No, my apologies.
No, please don't worry. These are great questions.
Yeah.
These are great questions, and I'm sorry I can't do more justice to it. But let's get ourselves into the topic for the day.
20 to 1.
Yeah, but exactly. So here we go, guys. Our last Mishnah. I mean, it's split into two there on the screen, but it's our last Mishnah of chapter 5. And we're going to try and go through all of this in the remaining time that we have together. So this is it. I mean, we should be excited. The last Mishnah we saw, if you recall, was the different ages and stages. And so now we come to 22 and 23 on the screen, or 26 in people's books. And we have got Ben Bagbag, and we have got Ben Hey. So the English on the screen here is not going to do a tremendous amount for us, if I'm completely honest. It will, but there's so much context that needs to be poured into the terse translation on the screen. So let's do this in Hebrew together as well. So we have Ben Bagbag Omer. We'll talk about the names in a minute. Ben Bagbag Omer. Hafochba v'hafochba Kulaba, right? Turn it over and turn it over again, for everything is within it. Uva techazeh, and look into it. I'm going to try and just quickly get my translation here. Look deeply into it. V'siv uveleva. This is all Aramaic, which is also very interesting because usually the Mishnah is written in Hebrew, but this is Aramaic. Uva techazeh, look into it. V'siv uvleva, and become grey and old over it. Umina lot hazua, and do not move away from it. Do not stir from it. She'ein lecha mida tova hemena, because there is no better portion than it. And then finally, Ben Hey Omer, Ben Hey says, Lefum tsara agra. According to the labor is the reward, or the reward is in proportion to the exertion. Or put another way, it's not just about the ends, it's about the means as well. So that is our Mishnah that we're going to look at. And as I said, without any further context, it's probably quite confusing. And you're going to say, turn over what? Do what? So we'll pause for comments and for questions. But if the question is, what on earth is this talking about? That's what we're gonna come to. So comments and questions.
I understood that the reason it was written in Aramaic was that the vast majority of people who didn't observe Torah spoke Aramaic, and this was addressed to them. That if you look and look again and keep looking, you'll find that there's truth in the Torah. You may have abandoned it, but there's truth there, and you should turn it over and turn it over. And that's why it's Aramaic, but that may be a false premise, I don't know.
Rabbi Nick, will you lock it on the screen, please?
Pardon me, Joy?
Can you lock it on the screen so it doesn't go back to whoever's talking? I don't know.
There it is, yeah.
Thanks.
So fundamentally what Martin is saying, without having said it, is that when we talk about hafachba, turn it over, turn it upside down, look at it from all directions, we're talking about the Torah, says Martin.
Yeah.
And the Mishnah and the Gemara.
Yeah,
everything.
Yeah. I realise. Torah study, let's say. And the reason why it's in Aramaic, says Martin, is because that's the language that we spoke back then. Although then you've got to say, well, why isn't the whole Mishnah in that language? Why is it just this one that seems to be in Aramaic? But yeah, go on, Joe.
Yes, I just came across a point. I've got a book called Avot, which gives explanations of Pirkei Avot, and I came across something which just shows how relevant the Torah is today. I'll read you the first bit quickly. In the field of preventive medicine, including infection and isolation, we can trace the laws of purification as dealt with in Leviticus 12 to 15. There is no doubt that the survival of the Jew to this day is to a large extent due to the unique and remarkable sanitary code of the Torah, which laid down strict rules for frequent washing of the body and clothing, and especially regulations for a clean water supply, which is one of the major discoveries of modern science. And apparently there was a valley called Hinnom near Jerusalem where they used to take all the dung and rubbish. They were not allowed to keep it, to burn. And I just thought, isn't that relevant to what the COVID laws are? To wash, to isolate, and to look after your food, to eat well. And those laws, so it just struck me that they're still relevant today. That's what they're telling us to do. And in this book, there are several sources of people, scientists and medical people who are not Jewish, who say the same thing, that the Mosaic period is extremely stringent quarantine rules, very likely did a great deal of good. Lots of scholars have said that the chief glory of biblical medicine lies in the institution of social hygiene as a science, and that we are remarkable for having discovered that all that time ago. So, how relevant the Torah was to today,
It's very interesting. And of course, if not just to COVID, but that there was, the discovery made in terms of world history not so long ago, when they couldn't understand why so many people were getting infections from operating tables and such, and they realized it's because they weren't sanitizing and cleaning their hands properly before operating on patients. Right? And you're right, we haven't had this problem historically because of our attention to cleanliness and our need to wash our hands ritually and all the rest of it. We were, I guess, one what's the word? One step ahead in that kind of thing. It is interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Joe.
Yes.
So a little bit about Ben Bagbag and Ben Hey Hey. They are very, very unusual names. And the background to their names is quite interesting. There's I think that I've got three nuggets over here. So number one is either they lived very short lives and so they are named after their fathers, right? Ben Azai and Ben Zoma seem to be two other examples of this, right? We're not told what their first names are. They're referred to as Ben Azai and Ben Zoma. We had them much earlier on in Pirkei Avot. And so they're only named after their fathers without giving us their first names to indicate that they lived short lives. But either way, Bagbag and Hey Hey seem to be unusual names, which is why there's another answer, which says that they were actually Roman converts to Judaism. And these were what's it called when you go into witness protection? The ancient equivalent of witness protection. They had their names protected, their identities protected, and so these were their two names. But there's a third one as well, which is also very interesting. They, following on from the theme that they were converts, so Bagbag, Bet Gimel, is an acronym for Ben Ger, that they were either they were converts or they were descended from converts. And Ben Hey Hey is in reference to Avraham and Sarah, who had the letter Hey added to their names, and they were the parents of all converts, so to speak, because they were the first people to discover monotheism, to discover Judaism. So Bagbag and Hey Hey are indicators of conversion. So interesting, because you don't really see their names floating around too much. Rita.
The word Ben means sun. Could it be sun off, bag?
So either Bag is the dad's name, right? And the reason why they don't have a first name is because they lived short lives, right? And in the same way that we have Ben Azai, the son of Azai, and Ben Zoma, the son of Zoma, who did not live for long, and that's how their names are remembered. So then that's why we have Ben Bag and Ben Hey, right? But the names are quite unusual, and so that's why there are these other potential answers that Bet Gimel is these are names that highlight the fact that they are converts. So yeah, Joe.
The same book again tells me that the full name is Jonathan ben Bagbag. He is mentioned in Kid 10b. He was proselytized by Hillel the Elder and became a teacher in Israel. And to understand the origin of his name, we go to Talmud Shab 31a. So I don't know. There was a heathen who was repulsed by Shammai, came to Hillel and asked that he be proselytized, and conditionally was taught only the written law and not the oral law. So it goes on and on. That's what this one has found. This book has found.
What were the two sources? Kiddushin what? Kid what?
10b.
10b and Shabbat.
And the other one is Talmud Shabbat 31a.
All right, I'll check those out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we talking about? Hafachba v'hafachba dekolaba. It's a very good Shweki song. Ben bag bag ben bag bag ben bag bag. Anyway, so what are we talking about? So this is the end of chapter 5, and it's very interesting because Pirkei Avot is actually only 5 chapters long. When we get on to chapter 6, please God, next week, that was added on to the Mishnah at a later point in time. But when Rabbi Judah the Prince, Yehuda Hanassi, was compiling the Mishnah, this is where it ends. This is where it stops. Very significant milestone, therefore. So this is, if we picture this as our final Mishnah, right? So then it's ending off telling us the following message: to constantly review, right? Hafachba v'hafachba, to constantly review, to turn it over, to examine Torah from different angles, from different directions. Dekolaba, because everything that we need to know is in the Torah. All of the wisdom that we would need to understand our role in the world, our purpose in the world, how to live in this world. It's all contained within our Torah texts, which is, as we discussed last time, it's a very bold, ambitious claim. You know, there are very, I think we mentioned this last time, that you can find all kinds of science and astronomy and physics and biology in Torah texts and in the words of our sages, and it's interesting, therefore, we are taught about Avraham that the way in which he knew what to do was by looking at the world. So it's not just that you look into the Torah, you can look into the world and see how one should live their life and what one needs to know to be able to live in this world. In fact, if you remember in the bigger picture, there was a source that said God looked into the Torah to create the world. So there's this kind of, coming at it from all sides. We could look at the world and understand what our role is, what our purpose is, what we're supposed to do. You know, there are sources that talk about how Avraham observed the laws of Pesach when the angels come and visit. That apparently was Pesach time. He was somehow able to look at the world and know about the Creator, to know what the Creator expected of us. So that is kind of one way of understanding, but also it's possible to learn through the verses of the Torah. It's possible to learn through the Mishnah. It's possible to learn through the Talmud, to learn through all of the sources, and to build a comprehensive and robust framework of wisdom and of knowledge. People like Rashi and the Rambam didn't go to universities and secular colleges and all that kind of their wisdom, which was so deep and so vast, and that's as well as all of the rabbis in the Talmud itself. The wisdom that they accumulated came from the study of Torah. I can't remember if we mentioned this the last time, but it talks about a group of, I don't remember how many rabbis, and it says the lowest of these rabbis was fully proficient in all of the biblical verses, all of the Mishnah, all of the Talmud, all of the Midrash, all of Kabbalah, all of the Gematrias, he knew how to understand the languages of animals. The lowest of the low of these rabbis, so to speak, was so proficient and so knowledgeable, and that came from their Torah study. So it's interesting. Obviously, that doesn't nowadays preclude people from gaining wisdom and knowledge from secular sources. We've talked about the need to be careful and to exercise due diligence and discretion with the types of sources that we expose ourselves to. But in this enlightened generation, it's important for us to realize just how much has its origins in Torah text and Torah thought and Torah philosophy. And so the fact that we have so much wider wisdom now is not evidence that you don't need the Torah. If anything, it's evidence of how much Judaism and the Torah has contributed to the knowledge that exists today in the secular world as well. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I'll pause for questions in a minute on that, but let's just finish with Ben Hey so that we can say Mazel Tov for ourselves on having gone through all of this. Ben Hey says Lefum Tsara Agra, which really sums up the Torah's attitude to life, which is that we judge, or we are judged by our efforts, not just on our reward, which is so counterintuitive to the way the world works. And we've talked about this, I'm sure, on a number of occasions. You are nothing without a degree. You are nothing without a robust CV of all of your accomplishments. But that's not part of the divine accounting. Hashem looks at what we have tried to do, not just at what we have done. I think we've given this example before. I'm sure we've given this example before. You go to a hospital to perform the mitzvah of visiting someone who's sick, and you get there and the nurse tells you, we just discharged them an hour ago. Right? So if we judge it by the results, then we go, oh my gosh, how selfish of them. How dare they go home? How dare they get better? Right? I came here to do a mitzvah and I didn't get to do my mitzvah. They robbed me of my mitzvah. But Lefum Tsara Agra teaches us that the fact that you made the effort to get down there, right, and they had gone home, or the fact that you were on your way to visit them, but, God forbid, got into a car accident and you never made it, or there was hours and hours of traffic, eventually you just turned around and went home. We get rewarded for the effort that we put in. I was talking about this somewhat with somebody recently, that when it comes to what they do and what they don't do on Shabbat, they do the best they can. And I said, well, what more could be expected from you in that time? You're doing the best you can. You're in a situation, and we don't judge just by the results. We judge by the effort as well. What would happen if a person lays tefillin every morning, but they're not well? They can't get out of bed. They're in hospital, whatever it is. So, the ratzon is there, the willingness is there. They're just not in a situation where they're able to do that. So are we going to, deprive a person of spiritual reward because of things that were beyond their control? So Lefum Tsara Agra teaches us that we don't. That, if a person's willingness is there, if they're trying, just because they didn't actually manage to do the thing that they set out to do, we are nonetheless also judged and given reward for the effort that we put in. And I guess also there's a philosophical point to realize that the only thing that is within our control is the effort. The result is really in Hashem's hands, which I think is an important philosophical point as well. We can only do what we can. It's going to be beyond our control if the traffic's bad or if the person's already been discharged. And you can transpose that into any scenario, into any mitzvah, into any situation that you find yourself in. It happens with business as well. I can spend all day working hard at my business, but if the market crashes, I ain't going to make my money, right? So in a results-driven world, what has a person achieved if they've put in all that effort and the business collapsed, right? But in an effort-driven world, then you can feel proud of what you have done to try and get to a certain place, but it are things that were beyond your control. So that is that is something to be considered. We can only put in the effort. It's going to be often out of our hands what the result is going to be. Interestingly, there's an interesting halachic brain teaser, right? Let's say you hire a decorator to come and paint your kitchen or to come and paint your lounge, okay? And they spend the whole day painting, and you come home at the end of the day and you walk in and they've done the wrong color, right? Should you pay them? Yes or no? Who said yes? Why should you pay them? They haven't done the job you asked them to do.
He's worked all day.
He's worked all day, but he's not done his job.
Depends on the information that you gave them. If you weren't clear about the colour you wanted, for instance, then they can't be blamed for painting it.
And what if it was just a mistake?
Then you don't pay them.
Joy would say you don't pay them. Results-driven world, you didn't deliver the result. You shouldn't be paid.
Well, I think halachically you don't have an obligation to pay on that score. But if that was a man or person who had a family to eat and this was their only means of income, it was a genuine mistake, then you would give them money out of charity.
Yes, that's different.
But you had no, you
might,
as
someone else might not.
I would have said no, but from a charitable view, you have to make a judgment on that person and the circumstances of them if you don't pay or you don't give them something.
Joe, I muted you before when we were getting noise, so we can't hear you at the moment. You need to unmute yourself.
And so that happened to me a few weeks ago when I had my kitchen done. I had a new kitchen. He painted, instead of, it was grey behind the cooker and all the rest was like a browny colour. And he painted it all grey. And I didn't notice till he'd done all gone. And he just had to repaint it.
This might be the same man that I was talking about.
You just had to do it again.
I had exactly the opposite. My wife chose a colour for the bedroom in our old house. And the painter did one wall, and he phoned us. We were both at work, and he said, "I'm not going any further. You better come and have a look." And when we did, it was so awful. We changed the colour, but we had to pay him for that work for that one. It was doubtful. Thank God he didn't paint the whole place.
So it's an interesting practical application to this concept that, in a world where we're so driven by results, right? People would perhaps intuitively decide that they don't owe the person anything because they gave them a job to do and they didn't do the job, so I don't need to pay. My hands are clean. It could be that the halacha is, and I'm not ruling on what the halacha is, but if a person has laboured and toiled for you, then you owe them money for that toil, perhaps not just as a charity, perhaps even as a halachic obligation. I don't know. I'm just pointing out that that there are wide-reaching considerations for putting in the effort. So, with that, before you go, Paul, let's just say Mazel Tov, everyone.
Mazel tov.
On reaching the end of chapter 5. We are going to go
We have
into
to see them, Rabbi, when we reach the end of chapter 6.
I'm extremely keen to make sure that we can do something. I really want us to be in person if we can. Please, I mean, I don't know where we'll be in 10 weeks or whatever it is before we get through the next chapter, but it would be lovely if we were able to really, make a big fuss over this achievement. Because it's been a long time coming. You guys are absolutely awesome. So I wish you all Mazel Tov, and Mazel Tov to everyone watching on Facebook and YouTube.
Thank you very much.
Are we going to do next week? Going to chapter 6, or are you leaving it for now?
No, we're going into chapter 6.
Okay.
Yeah. We're in the home stretch now.
Okay.
There's only, I think it was nine Mishnayot in the last one. I'll explain last week why it's a question. Oh, there's 11. I'll explain next week why Joe is asking that question. So stay tuned. But yeah, we'll go into chapter 6, and I look forward to it. To all those watching on Facebook and on YouTube, have a wonderful and meaningful day. To all those watching on